I'm sorry you weren't on the printed list that I had. Mr. Jones,
Okay.
you're recognized. Would you pull that closer to you?
Yes, ma'am. Madam Chairman, thank you, and ranking member as well. Madam Chairman, I just, as you did, finished a primary yesterday in North Carolina, and my district, the 3rd of North Carolina, most people have heard me for years talking about the growing debt of our nation, which now is about $19.2 trillion. I'm not saying that's the reason I won or not, but I think it did help because I've been very outspoken about it. So why did Mr. Massie and I introduce this amendment? We both found out through news reports about a year ago, and we actually put a bill in, which obviously is not going to be heard. It doesn't appear to be. So we wanted to offer an amendment in an open process, which obviously it's not going to be an open process. So therefore, we would like to ask the committee's consideration. What we learned a year ago is that all former speakers of the House, when they retire, have an office primarily in the Longworth building that is paid for by the taxpayers. This is a perk that I think is very unfair to the taxpayers of this country. The previous speaker, she is worth millions of dollars. The former speaker, the Republican, is worth millions of dollars, and yet the poor taxpayer is paying for the former speaker to have an office on the Hill that he never comes back to, and that includes everything, including the toilet tissue. The poor taxpayer is just sick and tired of programs that are set up to be perks. In addition, we found out also that since the previous speaker, Mr. Boehner, has left office, he's already spent $100,000. Okay, this money that is in the ledge branch appropriation pays for 3 staffers. The salaries can range anywhere from $158,000 for one staffer to $133,000 for a second staffer, and then he may have another staffer at $116,000. When you tell the people back in eastern North Carolina that the former speaker, this has nothing to do with Mr. Boehner, I would say it if it was Ms. Pelosi, that they're going to get this kind of perk with a staff and all the expenses paid, they are somewhat in disbelief that we as members of Congress with the debt at 19.2 would allow something like this, as small as it might be, meaning over a 5-year period of time, they have it for 5 years, it would probably cost somewhere around $1.3 to $1.4 million. It's not only the money, it's the principle of the thing. And when we know this as members of Congress and we permit this to happen, I mean, sincerely, this upsets the people back home who are paying the taxes. Now, and then I'm going to yield to then I will conclude my comments for Mr. Massie to speak. When you find out that this was created in 1970, and the reason it was, you had a wonderful Speaker of the House that my father served with, as a matter of fact, named John McCormick. He wasn't a multimillionaire. He wasn't playing golf in California and taking boat trips around the world. He didn't have the money. So the purpose of having this in place in 1970 to help an older gentleman leaving the office as a Speaker of the House maybe made sense, but in today's world, it doesn't make sense. And I hope that we would get a chance. We were going to offer this in the open process, but it's not going to be open. I hope we will get a chance to let our colleagues in both parties know about this $1.4 million over 5 years, and we find out, I doubt if you find any speaker that shows up in the office to begin with. And many times I've been by myself in the daytime, meaning morning and afternoon, and the doors are always locked. I've never found anybody in there so far. So with that, unless there are questions, I will allow Ms. Massie.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Mr. Massie.
Well, thank you, Vice Chairwoman Fox, for recognizing us and allowing us to present this amendment. I just want to say this This is in the millions of dollars. It's not in the billions or the trillions, so it's a relatively small amount, but that's how we start, and we have to find somewhere to start cutting the budget. A lot of times when you look for a tax thing to change or some spending to cut, there's a large constituency that's going to be hurt out there, and you start hearing from them, or even a small constituency. This benefits a constituency of one, that is the ex-speaker. And previous Speaker Hastert, while he was a lobbyist, benefited from this perk while he was a lobbyist. And I think that presents an ethical conundrum here. And I would just say that I think we need to start somewhere. The number that you quoted, 1.4 million, I believe is probably just for salaries. You got to start including also the space that's going to be occupied by this office. And at a time when I see us building extra office space over here in the Cannon building, which I'm not opposed to, but when I see we have to build more office space to accommodate a bigger government, I wonder why we have to keep office space for members who aren't even elected, who aren't here anymore. And so I don't know if this would pass or fail. If it undergoes a vote, this is not a poison pill. I've talked to every member I can talk to about this, and I don't see any member who says I would vote against this appropriations bill if it cut this funding for this ex-speaker perk. In fact, I can't find a single constituent at any of my town halls that is in favor of this perk. So I would hope that this is the people's house and we would represent the will of the people. At least give us a chance to have a vote on this amendment. And I yield back.
Mr. Castro, would you like to join our colleagues here at the table since you wanted to talk about Ledge Branch? Also, that's what they're talking about.
Thank you,
So.
Congresswoman. All right, am I up now? Yes, oh, very good. All right. Well, Chairwoman, members of the House Committee on Rules, thank you for having me here today to testify on my amendments to the FY17 Legislative Branch Appropriations Bill. Both of these amendments pertain to the provision in the committee report that overturns a recent Library of Congress decision to discontinue its use, or at least pending decision to discontinue its use of the term alien in its subject headings. My amendments aim to allow the Library of Congress to move forward with its proposed changes to replace the term aliens in subject headings with non-citizens, and replace the term illegal alien with non-citizens and unauthorized immigration. Let me be clear. I believe that the term alien is not only offensive, but also dehumanizing. These folks may not be U.S. citizens, but they're not from outer space. They're human beings. It stigmatizes immigrants in this nation and diminishes the quality of discussion around immigration issues in the United States. This type of negative treatment of immigrants isn't new, unfortunately, in our nation. In the past, derogatory terms were used to characterize the Irish and Italian immigrants, for example, who came here in centuries past. These groups were denied jobs and treated as second-class individuals. When ugly, belittling names are used to describe groups of people, those terms can make discrimination seem okay. When we move away from those offensive words and treat people with respect, it's harder for discrimination to take root. The Library of Congress's proposed changes would help make the vocabulary our nation uses to describe today's immigrants more respectful. The folks serving in our military, starting small businesses, and contributing to our economy who happen to be new immigrants deserve better than the word alien. Unless we act, this legislation will obstruct much-needed progress to remove the term alien from our acceptable vocabulary for immigrants. I would also point out that this of course, is an intrusion by Congress in the work of the library, and I believe that they should be allowed to do their job. So, for example, the Library of Congress previously used the term Negroes in its subject headings. That's since been replaced with African Americans. Our federal code used to include the terms lunatic and mentally retarded. Those have since been changed as well. The nature of language over time, in fact, changes, and we should all acknowledge this. And just last month, President Obama signed into law a bill introduced by our colleague, Congresswoman Grace Meng, that removes the terms Oriental and Negro from federal code. When this appropriations bill was marked up in the committee, Ranking Member Debbie Wasserman Schultz introduced an amendment to remove the alien-related measure from the legislation. In fact, 4 Republicans on the committee voted with Democrats to strike the provision but the effort fell one vote short. So there is bipartisan support to remove this language from the bill, and the issue deserves a vote in the full House. Madam Chairwoman, members of the committee, I want to close by highlighting the fact that never before in history has Congress so much as communicated with the Library of Congress about its subject headings, let alone introduced legislation on those headings. Each year, the Library of Congress makes thousands of changes to its subject headings. For example, in 2015 alone, 4,934 new subject headings were added. Is this the kind of history as a Congress we want to make? Do we want for the first time for Congress to interfere in the subject heading process of the Library of Congress? Thank you for the time, and of course, I'll be glad at the appropriate time to field questions. I yield.
Thank you very much. Mr. Cole, do you have any questions? No. Mr. McGovern?
I would just say, Mr. Castro, we had a lengthy debate about this issue earlier, and I agree with you. I think the term is offensive, and given the fact that the vote, and especially because the vote was so close in committee, I think every member ought to have a right to vote on it. And I hope that this doesn't fall into the new category of what they call poison pills. There's a new category we're establishing here in the Rules Committee to deny people certain amendments. And Mr. Jones and Mr. Massie, I think you ought to have a right to offer your amendment. I mean, I think people ought to be able to debate it, and if they want to vote with you, they ought to vote with you. If they want to vote against you, they ought to vote against you. But clearly, this is it's germane, and I certainly support making it in order. So I yield back my time.
Thank you. Mr. Collins? Judge Hastings?
Fox. Mr. Jones and Mr. Massey, on the matter pertaining to the office for the Speaker and the employees, did you research whether or not there's a wind down provision for former speakers? I know, Mr. Jones, you cited to Speaker McCormick and the fact that he was elderly, and maybe they set this up as a perk. I gather in those days they stayed around maybe a little longer than they do today. While I'm not quarreling with your amendment, and I believe it should be made in order and voted on, it just seems to me that the office of Speaker is of a caliber that would allow for some kind of wind down that might be a little different than the rank and file member of the Congress.
Judge, I would say that if I thought, and this, again, the times we're living in today are not the times when Speaker McCormick retired. Most members of Congress, not necessarily everybody in this room today, but most members of Congress have tremendous opportunities. When you look at the number of former members who are lobbying the Hill, sometimes it's just mind-boggling, to be honest about it. Okay, let me go back to your point. I don't believe that any speaker in the day's world of this high debt of 19.2 should have any time paid for by the taxpayer, but if they were going to have any time, shouldn't be more than a year. Because we have found out, I have myself been by this office probably 7, 8 times, different times a day, and I can't get in. I was going to introduce myself. I certainly was not going to tell them I had an amendment to do away with the office, but I was going to introduce myself. Nobody ever comes to the door. Yeah. And that's what, to me, is our responsibility. If we're going to try to save America from going bankrupt, these are little things like this. It might be small, but it adds up.
I follow you.
So that's my answer.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Fox.
Thank you. Mr. Byrne?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I have the same question for all three of you. If your amendment is made in order and is adopted on the floor, will you vote for the underlying bill, Mr. Castro?
I'm still looking at it, Congressman.
So you can't tell us today that you are or you're not.
I can't, no.
Okay. Mr. Jones?
I'll give you the same answer. If it is adopted by the House, I probably will.
Okay. Mr. Massie?
I'll raise them one, and I'll say if this amendment's in order, even if it doesn't pass, I plan to vote for the bill.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
I think,
Mr. Polis.
I think in hearing my friend Mr. Byrne's question, I mean, in many ways, I don't see it as a fair question to pose to our colleagues, because there are so many other amendments that may or may not pass. I mean, you know, to say try to get commitments to vote for or against a bill that we don't know what is in yet is really hard. I mean, I would never be able to say I was voting for or against a bill without knowing what amendments would be in it and wouldn't be in it. I mean, I guess if you're the kind of legislator where all you care about is just like one thing.
Will the gentleman yield?
Yeah, I'd be happy to yield.
Ms. Wasserman Schultz was here earlier, and I don't think you were in the room, and I asked her that question. And she
Right.
said, absolutely. I think if my amendment is adopted, I should be for the bill. And I told her I thought that was a show of integrity on her part, and it's a matter of integrity. If you're asking this body to vote for an amendment, and your amendment is adopted, then you should vote for the underlying bill. Now, I'm not telling you there's any legal obligation
No,
in that regard.
yeah.
I'm just telling you, if we're going to operate as a body that operates under regular order, that's regular order. I yield back.
Yeah, and I disagree as a legislator. I think if a bill adopts your amendment, you should of course be respectful and say kind things about that. But depending on whether your amendment actually how important it is relative to the bill, there may very well be times that you oppose a bill, even though your own amendment is in it. In many ways, it's an act of egoism to somehow say just because it is my little amendment. I mean, obviously, you know, Mr. Castro cares deeply, as do I, and I strongly support his amendment about removing offensive terms. But clearly, there are other aspects to this bill as well, and we don't know what's going to be in them. I plan on supporting both of these amendments. I don't know why we fund former speakers. In fact, I was going to ask, do we even fund former speakers' offices if those speakers are currently registered as lobbyists? If they later register as lobbyists, do they still get the public funding for their former speaker's office? And do they also continue to get that funds if they're later convicted of some crime? Or is it finally removed in that case?
There's one exemption in here that I noticed, which is if they're separated from their service by reason of expulsion from the House.
Right, which, so in talking about, I mean, we all know it's a matter of public record that legal travails of former Speaker Hastert, presumably he's still benefiting from these funds and would even if he was convicted of some crime.
He would have, I believe, but only for 5 years.
Oh, right, he was more recent than 5 years, so.
But he did take advantage of this.
While he was a lobbyist.
While he was a lobbyist.
Yeah, and I support your amendment, I support Mr. Castro's amendment. But as a legislator, we all want to get our amendments in. And there may very well be times when something is important enough to me as a legislator, well, I will swallow a bitter pill. And I would come out and say that, and I would say, look, I don't like this bill, but if it has this amendment that's very important in my district, I will support it. But I think in general, that's the exception. Generally, when we amend things, we're doing small things. Like, honestly, this former speaker salaries is a small thing. I mean, it's a good thing. I support it. But it wouldn't necessarily, it would make me more likely to support the bill if it's in it, because I plan to vote for it and I like it. But I'm going to have to look at what else is in the bill. I also strongly support Mr. Castro's, and I'm happy to yield to him as well.
Yeah, thank you, Congressman Polis. And just to clarify on Congressman Burns' question, I don't even mean to be coy on my answer. I think Congressman Graves and Congresswoman Wasserman Schultz are both on the Appropriations Committee and specifically on the subcommittee that deals with the legislative branch. So they've both had a chance to review this for quite a while, which is great for them. Most of us here deal with these bills as they come up ad hoc, and oftentimes don't make our decision until the amendments are done and they're presented. I would honestly tell you if my answer was no and I was going to vote against it, but we're still reviewing it.
Yeah, and we don't know what the final bill will look like. I would also strongly urge the committee to allow both of these amendments, because I think it's clear that neither of these are poison pills. I don't think either of these will affect how many members vote on the final bill. In fact, it's my understanding that, in fact, the one with regard to the removing the word alien was actually considered in committee, and it was not. The bill was nevertheless reported out without difficulty. I think that these are examples of the kind of amendments that this process hopefully will allow, as neither is offered in any way, shape, or form to sabotage a bill or remove a bill. They're both very good topics to discuss. I happen to support both. Some of my colleagues might support one, some might support neither. But I hope that we have the opportunity to vote on these two. Neither, in my opinion, will affect final passage of the bill. And with that, I'm happy to yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Newhouse.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to say thank you to all three of the members, Mr. Castro, Mr. Jones, Mr. Massie, for bringing these ideas forward. I appreciate the discussion and the consideration. I had a question about the tradition of giving speakers 5 years to get their affairs in order. I'm guessing that that's the purpose of that. I think, Mr. Jones, you made mention of the fact that this was started in the early 70s with Speaker McCormick, who was an elderly gentleman of not great means, and so it seemed appropriate to you, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but at least that's the gist of what your comments were. Recently, we've had more, I guess you'd say, well-off, better-off former speakers, and so you don't see a need for that. Then, in turn, if we had a speaker who was, again, in the same financial circumstances as Mr. McCormick, would that be proper use of public funds in your estimation? And then on top of that, exactly, do you know the historical reasons in 1970 why this was started and what function it performs?
I think it was initially to, and particularly my friends from Massachusetts, Mr. McGovern would probably know the history better than I, but my understanding was that Mr. McCormick, I actually met him when my father was sworn in as a member of Congress in 1966. One of the honors that I will carry to my grave was standing there. It was done in the Speaker's office, and I had a chance to meet Speaker McCormick. My understanding was the purpose that you stated was exactly why they did it. He was an elderly man. He was not a rich man. And it was done as a matter of respect. If we get into a situation where the speakers are in a similar type situation and we repeal this provision, then I would hope at that time that the House, whatever it might be at that time, maybe would to offer an amendment to reinstate it. But no, under no circumstances do I think in the current environment with all these speakers getting trips to play golf and to lobby and to write books and do all these things, I don't think the poor taxpayer right now should pay one dime, even a roll of toilet tissue for a former speaker. I do not.
Yeah, I think it's important to understand the historical significance and reasons why things were done 40, 50 years ago. And then just an idea occurred to me, and Mr. Castro, I believe that your idea was an issue that came before the committee, correct?
Yes, it's on. Well, in the committee report, there was an amendment to essentially not allow the Library of Congress or instruct the Library of Congress to continue using the term alien in their subject headings. And so I'm trying to get an amendment that would essentially strike that.
But the amendment did not pass in committee by a close vote, but...
I'm sorry, Debbie, you're right. She was unable to thwart it. Sure.
I guess just the thought occurred to me that we have standing committees for a reason, that issues come before a standing committee who delve deeply into the issue, much more so than we sometimes do in this committee here. And I just wondered if the role of the Rules Committee was to second-guess a decision of a standing committee by bringing up the same issue again. And so that was just a thought that occurred to me, and would submit that for consideration.
May I respond?
Will the gentleman yield?
Sure, absolutely.
Gentleman Young? I think that happens all the time as a matter of course here. And also, because that vote was close, the committee here is not making a decision on the substance of the matter. It would simply be putting it in front of the House so that all of us on what was a close vote in that committee would have an opportunity to vote on the matter.
I appreciate them. With that, Madam Chairman, I have no further questions. Again, thank you all.
Thank you. I think that completes our questions, and I thank the gentleman for being here. And we'll close the hearing on the Ledge Branch Appropriations Act. Now,